This is Misha. He's 12 years old, doesn't go to school and begs for a living. This is why Misha lives in this decrepit shack near Pazardzhik in Bulgaria. There's no running water or electricity in the house and food is in short supply. The family's meagre income mainly comes from picking snails, berries and mushrooms.
When Misha sees we have no money, he goes begging, I admit it. Sometimes we don't eat for 2 or 3 days. If there's flour, I make a flour mix. They're often starving.
While children from Roma families are clearly the poorest of the poor, more than 1 in 4 children in Bulgaria are threatened by poverty, one of the highest rates in Europe. The European Year 2010 is dedicated to fighting poverty and social exclusion. Bulgaria is involved in the project and has developed a national action plan, but funding is hard to come by.
The situation with child poverty in Bulgaria is definitely getting worse, despite Bulgaria entering the European Union. Part of this is probably, as a result of the crisis. Part of the other problem is what is the children's situation when you look at the EU. How are children really part of the political agenda? Because I'm afraid to say that if children were chicken or pigs, the EU would be much better, would do much better, as regulations for children. And part of our recommendations is that really child poverty and well-being should put, high on the political agenda.
The economic crisis brought cuts in education and social services budgets that risk having a dramatic effect on children for years to come. The school in this almost abandoned village near Biela Slatina has just closed, leaving the children with a long bus ride to class every morning. Ask the youngsters here what the future holds in store for them, and the answer is unanimous: emigration. This teenager's parents have already fled to Spain for work, and Peter is likely to follow.
We'll leave for other countries here and there to earn money for our families. We can't live like this. As you can see, there's a crisis here.
Affordable childcare is vital to coax many parents back to work. Yet with incomes and state budgets both falling, it remains a luxury for many. Petya is a single mum with major health problems. She'd like to put her daughter in a creche, but can't afford to because of rising costs. So her daughter hangs out at the hairdresser's salon at the bottom of the garden.
It's very difficult from a moral and financial point of view to be both mother and father. For the child, it's also very tough.
It's not all doom and gloom. This EU-funded new state-of-the-art centre in Pazardzhik provides a refuge for youngsters struggling to cope with extreme poverty, domestic violence and sexual abuse at home. It also acts as a shelter for young mothers at risk of abandoning their babies. 17% of the population across the EU lives in a state of poverty. The poverty line is defined as someone living with less than 60% of the median income. Child poverty does not just afflict the EU's poorest countries like Bulgaria. All across Europe, whole families, children, parents and grandparents find it hard to escape poverty, as it seems it's passed on from one generation to another. In the European Union, 80 million people live below the poverty line. 19 million of them are children. Governments have pledged to lift 20 million people out of poverty over the next decade.
I think it's a scandal in the European Union today, where we do have such tremendous wealth, that we are unable to provide for 20%, 1 in 5 of children in the European Union living at risk of poverty. It's a real slight on our society that we are not able to create a society in which there is a solidarity between the different generations and between the different social groups, that we can ensure that every child has the rights and the right conditions to fulfil their true potential.
After more than a decade of breakneck growth, Ireland rose to be officially classed as the EU's second richest state. But there's little sign of the country's economic miracle in the deprived Ballymun housing estate in northern Dublin. Local children at this after-school centre are not too impressed with their neighbourhood.
It's dirty. I don't know. It's stupid. I don't like living around here.
All right. Because of all the bad stuff going on, of shooting and all the gangs hanging around and people hitting you and stuff like that. Drinking and fighting and drugs and stuff like that.
The Ashleen project provides some respite for the children.
Want to play?
But with the crisis biting and the centre facing funding cuts of 20%, the children's parents are anxious for their future.
Most of our children, or probably even the next generation, will end up emigrating because there's nothing in Ireland.
It's going to be tough when the kids will grow up, especially with no jobs out there for them.
You know what I mean? There's no jobs, you know what I mean? Good paying jobs. These teenagers, they're all in gangs. You know, if you're taking on one, you're taking on all. You know, so you could see there's a big increase with alcohol with the teenagers because they've nothing else to do.
It's estimated that around 200,000 people live in consistent poverty in Ireland. By EU standards, the country has amongst the highest rates of child poverty. The crisis has hit hard. Unemployment has soared from 3 to 13%. The government has cut welfare payments and some health and education services.
Children should not bear the brunt of this economic crisis. They should not disproportionately have to suffer.
Children growing up in single-parent families are 4 times more likely to experience poverty than those in families with 2 parents.
Being a single parent is very difficult. Childcare is incredibly expensive in Ireland. The lone parents, you can barely pay the bills and the rent on the social welfare we get.
You just feel like you're letting your kids down, that you can't, you know, dip into your savings because you have no savings there.
Solutions do exist for tackling child poverty. This EU-funded centre in Dublin acts as a social centre and creative hub for deprived youngsters and provides childcare for working parents. Europe has succeeded in putting child poverty on the political agenda, and EU funding certainly helps. But the harsh fact is that millions of children still live in poverty in Europe, and without a concerted effort from member states that are on the front line, the crisis risks making this dire situation even worse.